There's a sculpture in Naples that shouldn't exist. I don't mean it's impressive, I don't mean it's beautiful, though it is both of those things. I mean it violates the physical properties of marble. The Veiled Christ, created in 1753 by a sculptor named Giuseppe San Martino, a life-sized figure of Christ, lying in death covered by a shroud. But here's what's wrong with it. The shroud is marble, the same material as the body beneath it, carved, they tell us, from a single block of stone, and the veil is so thin you can see through it. I'm not speaking metaphorically. Stand in San Severo Chapel in Naples. Position yourself at the right angle and you can see light passing through the stone. You can see the features of Christ's face beneath the veil, the curve of his nose, the hollow of his eyes, the definition of his lips. Stone should not be translucent. The thinnest sections of that veil measure around 2 millimeters. Thinner than the screen you're watching this on. Thinner than 2. Stacked credit cards. Marble is a crystalline structure. It fractures when carved that thin. It chips. It crumbles. The material cannot support its own weight at that thickness. The molecular bonds simply don't hold. Yet there it sits, 273 years old. Perfect, unbroken. Not a single crack or chip. Ask a modern stonemason how it was made. They'll speak in generalities. Exceptional skill. Years of practice, infinite patience. The slow, methodical work of a master craftsman. But when you press them for specifics, show me the technique, demonstrate the process, explain the actual steps required, they can't, because nobody knows how to do it anymore. And here's what's stranger. Giuseppe San Martino was 32 years old when he created the Veiled Christ. It was his first major commission, his first veiled sculpture, his first attempt at this supposedly ancient technique that required decades of mastery to even approach competence. And somehow, on his first documented try, he created the most technically perfect example of stone veiling ever made. More refined than his teacher, Antonio Corradini's work, more delicate than anything Corradini produced throughout his entire career, more impossible than anything that came before or has been attempted since. How does a sculptor on his first attempt at a technique supposedly requiring a lifetime of practice exceed the acknowledged master who supposedly taught him? The official answer, natural genius, prodigious talent, the kind of once-in-a-century ability that defies explanation. But when you search for San Martino's early work, his practice pieces, his learning attempts, his failed experiments, the progression you'd expect from someone developing such skill, there's nothing, no evolution, no development, no learning curve, just suddenly, fully formed, impossible mastery. Unless someone taught him something that had nothing to do with carving. The man who commissioned this sculpture was not a typical patron. Raimondo di Sangro, Prince of San Severo, Grand Master of Neapolitan Freemasonry, born 1710, died 1771, he wasn't just wealthy, he wasn't just educated, he was an alchemist. When Antonio Corradini, the acknowledged master of veiled sculpture, died suddenly in 1752, Raimondo di Sangro personally selected young Giuseppe San Martino to complete the Veiled Christ. And according to the timeline, within months of that selection, San Martino produced perfection. Not years of apprenticeship, not decades of practice, months, as if Raimondo di Sangro simply showed him the formula. Now look at the pattern of veiled sculptures across Europe. Bust of a veiled woman. Venice, 1725. Created by Antonio Corradini. Known as Puritas, the veil carved to appear translucent over the figure's face and body. The Veiled Vestal Virgin. Rome, 1743. Also Corradini. Life-sized figure standing 230 centimeters tall. The Bust of Modesty. Naples, 1752. Corradini again. Female figure entirely shrouded in stone fabric. Same. Impossible thinness. Same translucent quality when light strikes it from certain angles. All created within a narrow window between 1725 and 1753. All exhibiting identical, impossible characteristics. But here's the coordination problem that nobody addresses. These sculptors worked in different cities, different workshops, under different patrons. There's no documented knowledge transfer, no apprentices traveling between Venice, Rome, and Naples to spread the technique. No published treatises explaining the methodology, no surviving letters discussing the process. Yet they all independently produced the same physical impossibility at roughly the same time, as if they all had access to the same source of knowledge. I found something in the historical archive of the Bank of Naples. A receipt, dated December 1752. It documents payment to Giuseppe San Martino for his work on the Veiled Christ. The language is specific. A statue of our Lord in death covered by a veil also of marble. I read that phrase 5 times before I understood what bothered me about it. Not carved with a marble veil to resemble fabric, not featuring a stone veil designed to appear as cloth, covered by a veil also of marble, as if it was something else first, then became marble. What if that's not poetic language? What if the receipt writer knew exactly what he was documenting? What if fabric was physically laid over the sculpture and petrified into stone through a chemical process? That would explain everything. The translucence, because the material was originally semi-transparent fabric, not opaque marble carved impossibly thin. The thinness, because fabric can naturally be that thin without structural failure. The perfect draping, because it was actually draped, not carved to appear draped. The absence of tool marks, because no tools touched the veil itself. I examined high-resolution photographs of the veiled Christ under raking light, illumination at extreme, angles that reveals microscopic surface texture invisible under normal lighting conditions. I found compression lines beneath the veil, not carved decorative details, not tooling marks left by chisels, compression patterns, the kind of impressions fabric would leave if pressed into soft stone. The folds aren't carved to represent fabric, they are fabric, fossilized in calcium. Now expand the timeline beyond Europe. References to stone softening appear throughout historical texts in the 1700s and 1800s, not as myth, not as speculation, as documented observation. Colonel Percy Fawcett, British explorer and cartographer. During his expeditions to the Amazon basin in the early 1900s, he reported accounts of a liquid extracted from jungle plants that could render stone soft enough to mold by hand. He took samples of the plant material. He documented the process in field notes. He promised detailed investigation upon his return to England. He disappeared in the Amazon in 1925, along with his son and another expedition member. The plant samples were never cataloged. His field notes from that expedition were never published. The botanical species he described was never officially identified. Convenient. Jesuit records from the 1600s describe vitriol-based processes for rendering stone briefly plastic, their exact words, for architectural purposes. The records are fragmentary, incomplete. Multiple pages appear to have been physically removed from the bound volumes. Then, between 1800 and 1850, something fundamental changes. Stone softening references begin systematically disappearing from official scientific and educational texts, not refuted through experimentation, not disproven through research, simply removed. And this isn't coincidental timing. This is the exact period when centralized educational systems were being established across Europe and America, when scientific academies were standardizing acceptable knowledge, when historical narratives were being written and codified by government institutions. Academic curricula that once included alchemical studies shifted entirely to modern chemistry, with alchemy dismissed as superstition. Libraries were reorganized, collections were updated, books were reclassified or removed. Universities systematically purged their holdings of pre-scientific texts, categorizing them as outdated, primitive, or dangerous to modern understanding. By 1850, stone softening had been relegated to folklore. By 1900, it was treated as primitive misunderstanding, evidence of pre-scientific thinking. But the physical evidence remained, until they started demolishing it. The Singer Building, New York City, 1908, 47 stories, 612 feet tall. At the time of its construction, one of the tallest buildings in the world, the exterior featured intricate terracotta facades of such delicate complexity that modern architects openly admit they lack the capability to reproduce them with contemporary techniques. Demolished in 1968, the tallest building ever voluntarily destroyed at that time. Official reason for demolition: architecturally obsolete, structurally inefficient, not economically viable. But examine photographs of the stonework before demolition, the organic flowing designs, the impossibly thin decorative elements, the precision that modern computational design struggles to match. Pennsylvania Station, New York City, 1910, one of the most celebrated examples of Beaux-Arts architecture in America. Massive granite columns supporting soaring travertine walls, vaulted ceilings requiring engineering techniques that architectural historians still debate. The stone was fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters. The columns were so precisely carved they required virtually no mortar. Demolished in 1963 to make way for Madison Square Garden. The Larkin Administration Building, Buffalo, New York, 1906. Frank Lloyd Wright called it one of his greatest architectural achievements. It featured innovations that were decades ahead: air conditioning, built-in furniture, structural engineering that wouldn't become common until mid-century. The stonework exhibited those same organic flowing forms, that same impossible precision. Demolished in 1950, replaced with a parking lot. All constructed during the same narrow period, 1880 to 1920. All demolished during the 20th century. All exhibiting stonework that exceeded the supposed capabilities of their era. Not because they were structurally unsound, not because they were dangerous, because they were labeled obsolete. That specific word appears repeatedly in demolition records and architectural reviews. Obsolete. As if buildings exhibiting superior craftsmanship, more sophisticated engineering, and demonstrably greater durability than modern construction are somehow less advanced than what replaced them. unless obsolete means something different, unless it means evidence of something we're supposed to have forgotten. Here's where Tartaria enters the picture. 18th and 19th century maps, French, British, German, Russian cartography consistently label vast regions of northern and central Asia as Tartary or Tartaria. These aren't speculative maps or fictional geography. These are official government documents, navigation charts, military maps, administrative records, all agreeing on the nomenclature for over a century. Then, gradually after 1850, the name vanishes from cartography, replaced with Russia, Mongolia, China, Kazakhstan, as if nothing fundamental changed except the labels we use. But the architectural record from that precise transitional period shows something interesting. Structures attributed to local builders or Russian state engineers that exhibit construction techniques, mathematical sophistication, and stonework methods that shouldn't exist according to the available technology and documented knowledge. The Kazan Cathedral, St. Petersburg, completed 1811. The colonnade features 96 identical Corinthian columns, each carved from a single piece of granite, identical proportions, identical fluting, identical decorative capitals. How do you achieve that uniformity across 96 massive stone columns without industrial machinery, without power tools, without modern measuring equipment? How do you transport 96 monolithic granite columns, each weighing multiple tons, position them with millimeter precision, and carve them to be functionally identical? The official answer: patience, skill, and sufficient labor. But patience doesn't explain precision at industrial scale, and skill doesn't explain coordination across dozens of independent craftsmen producing functionally identical results. The neoclassical architectural movement of the late 1700s and early 1800s produces virtually identical government buildings, museums, banks, and opera houses across Europe and America. Same proportions, same dome structures, same column arrangements, same underlying mathematical relationships. The standard explanation? Architectural fashion. Everyone copying Greek and Roman classical styles. But when you compare these buildings to their supposed Greek and Roman models, they're not copies. The proportions are different. The mathematics are more sophisticated. The load-bearing techniques are more advanced. The construction methods exceed what the ancient models supposedly achieved. These buildings claim inspiration from classical architecture, but they exceed their supposed models in every measurable technical dimension, as if the builders were following instructions or templates they didn't fully understand, instructions inherited from something older than Rome or Athens. And the physical evidence extends far beyond Europe. Sacsayhuaman, Peru, massive polygonal stones, some weighing up to 200 tons, fitted together with precision measured in fractions of a millimeter. No mortar, no cement, no gaps visible to the naked eye. Stones shaped with complex curves, and angles that interlock three-dimensionally like a jigsaw puzzle designed by someone who understood geometry in ways we're still trying to comprehend. The official archaeological explanation? They used harder stones to pound softer stones into precise shapes over many years. But modern analysis reveals there are no percussion marks on these stones, no evidence of hammering, no grinding marks, no signs of the pounding process that supposedly created them. The surfaces are smooth, polished to a degree that suggests molding, not carving. And the fits, tolerances so precise you cannot insert paper between the blocks, cannot slide a razor blade into the seams, suggest the stones were shaped while pressed together, conforming to one another in real time. That's not pounding, that's molding. The Aswan quarries, Egypt, red granite blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, cut and arranged with accuracy that modern stonemasons using diamond-tipped saws struggle to replicate. No obvious tool. Marks. No evidence of the copper chisels and dolerite pounders that Egyptologists claim were the available technology. Granite registers 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, one of the hardest stones on Earth. Copper tools register 3 to 4 on that same scale. You cannot cut material rated 6 to 7 with tools rated 3 to 4. The mathematics of material science make it physically impossible. Yet the official historical narrative maintains that this is exactly what happened. Göbekli Tepe, southern Turkey. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some reaching 18 feet in height and weighing 10 tons, carved with intricate relief sculptures of animals. Foxes, birds, serpents, scorpions, rendered in detail requiring precise tool control. Radiocarbon dated to approximately 9,600 BCE, before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before cities, before metal tools, before written language, before ceramics. The official archaeological interpretation: nomadic hunter-gatherers, using stone tools and rope, somehow quarried these massive pillars, carved them with precision, transported them significant distances, and erected them in precise circular arrangements. But close examination of the surfaces reveals the same signature we've been seeing. Smooth surfaces, precise angles, organic curves that suggest plasticity rather than percussion. Peru, Egypt, Turkey, Italy, Russia, France, Austria, separated by thousands of miles, spanning from 9,600 BCE to 1753 CE, over 11,000 years. No documented contact between these civilizations during their construction periods, yet they all exhibit the same physical characteristics. Smooth surfaces where tool marks should be, impossible precision where we expect crude approximation, organic flowing forms where we expect rigid geometry, evidence of plasticity where we expect percussion. Unless they inherited something, unless there was a global knowledge system that predated all of these civilizations, a technology for temporarily altering the molecular structure of stone, making it soft, moldable, shapeable, then letting it reharden to full strength. I started looking for the pattern of Erasure. The Great Fire of 1812, Moscow, destroyed approximately 3/4 of the city. Records burned, libraries lost. Centuries of architectural documentation vanished. But many of the buildings survived. Stone structures requiring advanced engineering, sophisticated mathematics, precision that exceeded what the available technology of that era should have allowed. The Chicago Fire of 1871, widespread destruction, historical records lost. But certain buildings survived, specifically ones built with pre-fire techniques that post-fire construction couldn't replicate even with supposedly superior industrial methods. The San Francisco earthquake and subsequent fire of 1906. City archives destroyed, centuries of documentation burned, but photographs taken before the disaster show buildings exhibiting that same sophisticated stonework, those same organic forms, that same precision we keep finding. Notice the pattern. Cities burn, records vanish, documentation is destroyed. But the buildings remain briefly, and then they're systematically demolished during urban renewal and modernization, without architectural documentation, without preserving construction samples, without detailed analysis of the techniques used, almost as if the goal was eliminating physical evidence. Modern stonemasons cannot recreate the veiled sculptures. They try. They approximate with diamond-tipped bits, precision grinding equipment, computer-aided carving systems, but their results are thicker, less refined, obviously mechanical in execution. The 18th century originals remain technically superior to anything we can produce with vastly more advanced technology. How is that possible? How do hand tools wielded by humans exceed the precision of computer-controlled diamond-tipped equipment? Unless the 18th century sculptors had something we don't. Not better tools. Different knowledge. Stone is calcium carbonate organized in crystalline matrices. The molecular bonds between calcium and carbonate ions determine hardness. We know certain acids can disrupt these bonds. We know certain plant compounds can temporarily affect calcium-based structures. We know chemical processes can alter material properties. We know petrification occurs in nature, organic materials gradually replaced by mineral deposits, becoming stone. Could that process be controlled, accelerated, reversed? The knowledge clearly existed. The historical texts document it. The physical evidence demonstrates it. Then it was systematically removed from our collective understanding. Why? Who benefits when this technology is lost? If stone could be temporarily softened, shaped, and rehardened using a chemical formula, anyone with that formula could build sophisticated structures. The quarrying industry loses control over stone supply. The construction industry loses its monopoly on specialized knowledge. Banking loses leverage over the massive capital requirements of traditional construction. Centralized institutional power loses a critical tool of control. When construction requires massive capital investment, rare specialized knowledge, expensive equipment, and extended timelines, it can be controlled, regulated, taxed, monopolized. When anyone with a chemical formula can soften and shape stone, that control evaporates. So the formula was removed, the texts were purged, the evidence was demolished, and we were taught it never existed, but the sculptures remain. You can visit San Severo Chapel in Naples today, stand directly in front of the veiled Christ, look at stone so thin it appears translucent, look at folds that flow like frozen waves, look at what shouldn't be physically possible. The megalithic sites remain. You can visit Sacsayhuaman, measure the tolerances yourself, run your hand across surfaces that show no tool marks. You can go to Aswan, examine the precision cuts in granite. You can travel to Göbekli Tepe, see 11,600-year-old stonework that exceeds our current capabilities. The evidence isn't hidden, it's not secret, it's in plain sight. We've just been systematically taught not to ask the obvious questions, taught that exceptional skill explains physical impossibility, taught that patience explains industrial scale precision without industrial tools, taught that primitive peoples with stone hammers built structures we can't replicate with diamond saws, taught that technology only progresses forward, never gets lost, never regresses. But that bank receipt from December 1752 sits in the historical archive of the Bank of Naples. Anyone can request to examine it. The language is preserved. covered by a veil also of marble, not carved, covered. And then it became marble. When you assemble all the evidence, when you see the full scope of what's been lost, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. There was a technology, a process for manipulating stone, for rendering it temporarily plastic, for shaping it in ways our current industrial methods cannot replicate. This technology was widespread, global, practiced across civilizations that had no documented contact with one another for over 11,000 years. And then, within a single generation, it vanished. Not gradually through natural technological evolution, where old methods are slowly replaced by better innovations, but abruptly, completely, unless it was deliberately taken from us. Stone softening references appear consistently in scientific and alchemical texts throughout the 1700s. Then, during the early 1800s, precisely when educational systems centralized, when knowledge was standardized, when historical narratives were codified, those references systematically disappear, not through scientific refutation, through administrative removal. The question isn't whether stone softening existed. The sculptures prove it existed. The megalithic sites prove it existed. The historical accounts prove people witnessed it. The question is, why were we taught it didn't exist? What else have we been told never happened? What else was erased from collective human knowledge? And most unsettling, who decided what we're allowed to remember? I can't answer that definitively, but I can show you the pattern. That receipt in Naples, those compression lines under raking light, those 96 identical granite columns in St. Petersburg, those demolished buildings labeled obsolete despite technical superiority, those fires that destroyed records but left buildings standing until the buildings were demolished too, that systematic removal of alchemical references from academic curricula between 1800 and 1850. We didn't invent progress, we inherited ruins, and then we forgot how to read them, or we were taught to forget. The veiled Christ remains in San Severo Chapel, delicate, translucent, impossible. A technology we've been told never existed. Look at the folds of that stone veil, at the way light passes through calcium carbonate, at the precision no chisel could achieve, and ask yourself, what else are they hiding in plain sight?